Good evening, and welcome to MOTS presents MOTS Ado About Nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary MOTS scale to classic and contemporary literature.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language, you have been warned.
And welcome to another session of MOTS Ado About Nothing. We are here with Steve-O,
Hello.
Scott,
Adios. Hello.
Ian,
Hello.
and Katie.
Hi.
My name is Veronica, and today we're going to be covering a story titled Happy Birthday or Feliz Aniversário by Clarice Lispector.
Hello, Clarice. Yes, all right. So I'm giving a log line. I came up with a number of things, but at the end of the day, I settled on Happy Death Day, parentheses, Grandma, and, and parentheses.
Perfect.
I think it's pretty good.
Spot on.
And we'll go into why that I think is accurate.
And just a brief summary of the story, Ian.
Okay, so this tale takes place at a grandma's birthday party, and it kind of deals with the entire family, a lot of the members who don't want to be there, having to show up for this kind of out of habit, more so than any kind of loving relationship, and the interplay between all the family members.
Now, this is going to be a great episode, specifically for me, just because Clarice Lispector is one of my favorite writers of all time. If you're a woman, period, you should be reading her. It's a translation. It's originally in Portuguese, but it is worth reading it because every woman will get a different experience out of it. And I think as a whole, she's been described as the most influential writer since Kafka, which is...
Is that right?
Yes. I'm sorry, let me
you.
correct myself. The most influential Jewish writer since Kafka.
Okay.
Just to kind of clarify that. But being a woman, I have provided male authors for this podcast before, and she is, I think, absolutely necessary, a must read for any woman and males in general from what we're going to hear, going into the story. So starting it up, I'm going to go into the intro. So the story, just like Ian told us, was about a happy birthday celebration for the grandmother, and just going into it, the introduction into the story is phenomenal because it's walking into a house with any family gathering that you or I have walked into where you really don't want to be there, but you have to be there. The immediate descriptions of the characters, of saying what they look like, how they wanted to appear as if they were prepped and ready for a really nice family gathering, yet their faces, the reasoning behind them being there is immediately explained. They clearly don't want to be there, and that's a great start to the story because it kind of just builds and builds and builds without even touching on the main characters. So I am going to give it a 1.
Well, I think that this story does a really good job of portraying any kind of large family get together, and I love hanging out with my family, but there are always those parties where you're like, this is kind of, I have to be here, and it's very strange to have all the different generations there with you, and I think that this story does a very good job of portraying that. Like right from the get-go, it's like people that kind of show up that don't necessarily want to be there, and then it kind of tells a story about a little bit about who people are in the beginning.
Well, they're all fake. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go
I
ahead.
was going to say they're all fake, and that's the setup, of course. Or at least they have to pretend to enjoy this event they're about to, again, habitually go through the motions of, but they don't want to, but they're going to force themselves to, which speaks to a number of questions later, but I think that was, as you were saying, Veronica, in the setup. And yeah, with that, like, it builds a sense of now you got the framework, what's about to happen in this story, given what's been presented to you in the introduction.
Well, there's 3 characters you're introduced to immediately.
Mm-hmm.
2 are daughter-in-laws and 1's a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting, and I'm going to build upon this in themes eventually, but they're described by their role in the family. more so than their names. And
Yeah,
you have the
that's true.
daughter-in-law from this place because the son didn't want to show. You have the daughter-in-law from this area whose son is going to come later. You have the named daughter, Zilda, who is the one the mother lives with. So it's more of their roles they play in the family. And on a personal note, since you mentioned it, I'm going to regret saying this if any of my family hears this, but I'm always a whore for family events because I get money from my family. So I show up
Oh,
just
man.
for that fact. Like I have to show up even though I hate like being there. I have nothing in common with any of them. And I feel that this really comes through in this story is the role that like we're here either out of duty or to get something out of this.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like I said,
but the question is, where does the intro end?
That's what I was just going to ask.
The only thing I was going to say about this story is I really enjoyed her using descriptive purposes instead of dialogue to show the backwork, the background interdynamics in between the family. She didn't have to really mention a lot of what was said, but through body language and the way things that they were wearing and the glances that they gave other people. I think she used that technique as a way to really get you caught into the story, which is why it's so hard to kind of differentiate between, because it's such a smooth transition.
yeah, I think that's somewhat the point for sure.
You kind of get that
Does a
straight
good job.
away.
Absolutely.
But back to Ian's question, I think that we have to decide where the introduction ends.
May I propose?
I think I
one
got
for
it.
this?
Propose away.
When the point of view firmly shifts over to the old woman.
That's quite
Well,
far down
that's
the
pretty.
story.
That's pretty.
Yeah, that's a
far
good
in.
one, but yeah, I want to call it a little bit
That's
earlier.
about. I
think
think that's
the
about
fourth paragraph?
halfway. No, what? No. Oh, the fourth paragraph.
Or when she's introduced. The old
that
woman's
makes more sense.
introduced to the
Yeah,
story.
that makes more sense. There's a point in this story where you get into her head,
Yes.
into the grandmother's head. That's much later.
Yes. I sorry, misspoke. It was when the great grandmother, however you want to describe her, the old woman is introduced.
The
and you
birthday
start
girl is
realizing-
how I want to
birthday
describe
girl.
Yeah, the birthday girl. Yeah.
Sure, I mean that's not a. I'm not opposed to that, cutting it up there, but to me, when I first read it, my cutoff was when the rest of the family shows up and the
Yeah.
party becomes in full swing.
I felt like there was a definite distinction between when the males arrived and then the unspoken words between the females.
I'm going to disagree there. I think that the introduction stopped or ended, I think, as soon as they said, at the head of the large table, the birthday girl was turning 89 today.
All right,
And
that's
the
pretty good,
reason
too.
why I'll say it is because within the first 3 paragraphs of the story, especially the third paragraph, it's kind of setting the tone for the entire family. It comes into, like you were mentioning before, everyone's roles in the family, why they were there. And the third paragraph, you're learning about the person who's actually been given the responsibility of caring for the birthday girl or the grandmother in this case.
Mhm.
And I think that one paragraph really sums up the entire family, because it even mentions, this one person out of 6 brothers and, the one girl, she was the one who was left to have to take on this responsibility, which I think goes into a lot of, roles in this time period, and then also in Latin American families where the woman is also always the caretaker. And I think right there it kind of goes into the type of roles and themes, throughout the story, which we'll go more into depth, but I think that's where
That's
the
where it
story
switches. Yeah.
picks up, because then there's dialogue. And I think that's where we start kind of going into other things. That, at least my opinion.
I might not
That's,
disagree with that. Yeah, it's a fine. Again, like I think everything we said is acceptable to draw it at, but
Right.
that's a good one too, because I think it does cut it up very nicely because of what you just said, where you can start seeing the switch over essentially.
I think I agree with that. Do we know? I don't think it's said. Maybe it did, and I just am misremembering. But do we know like what the time period is that this is set in?
I don't think there's anything specifically referenced.
Side
right?
note, in Latin American culture, this is still the case. So maybe I should probably rephrase that and say that this is just general.
It's sort of a generic
Yes.
kind of setup.
Right,
As
but
opposed to a time period.
it could possibly give us a little like a little background if we
Context,
know
maybe.
like
Sure.
I feel that because it describes the fashions of the time.
Mhm.
Yeah, granted, there's a lot of formal dress there, but I feel that you could, if you did research
You get
and
a
knew
sense of
more
it.
about it, you can
Yeah.
contextually pick out
Yeah.
when this occurred. But I think it was meant to be kind of open, kind of.
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
not necessarily
Sure.
nailed down.
I
I don't
could
know
take
why,
that.
but it felt kind of 80s to me.
Well,
I have no
a
idea
sucker
why.
for
like,
the 80s,
it's
clearly.
not like it, you know.
I mean, you have to think about when communism was happening, and she probably could have been a young girl. She could have been an adult. So, a lot of people in that
yeah,
age range tend to dwell on things in the past. So
yeah. I guess we don't really.
it could be modern. Could
Yeah,
be
I think the
80s,
same
could
sense.
be-
It's supposed to be somewhat uncertain. Like, they're not
Mhm.
nailing it. She's not nailing it down necessarily because it's more like more broader aspects that she's
Right.
focusing on, and not necessarily a specific time period.
Well, I guess either way.
But either way. I think that's a fine line to draw for the introduction, and I will give it a 1 for doing scores.
I'm gonna also give it a 1. I think it did a good job of like introducing
As a good hook,
introducing
for sure.
the setup. Like giving the setting a very good introduction, explaining that very well.
There's I guess, musicality to the way it's written that draws you in. And I think I believe Veronica mentioned earlier that it establishes right off the bat what to expect for the rest of this.
The sort of
And-
dynamics. Yeah.
and it had me hooked throughout the entire thing, but right from the beginning. So I have to give it a 1.
All right,
I'd agree. Also,
Right.
1.
definitely a
and
hook.
Scott, you said 1 as
Yep.
well,
I
right?
think we unanimously agree here.
All right.
So, yep.
So I guess it is on to me for the body
All
of
you.
this.
So it's kind of the same problem. Work
It's-
backwards and where you
Yeah,
cut it off at.
I'm kind of trying to think of where I'm going to cut it into the body and the ending. The whole story is kind of one big thing. It's all about this party, and like a lot of the body. So about maybe halfway through, maybe a little bit more. The birthday girl. You actually jump into her head and see what she's thinking, and I don't know if all of that is the conclusion. Basically, what happens is you go through the whole story, and everybody's kind of trying to be there for this grandmother, the grandmother of the family, who the matriarch of the family, and she just kind of sits there silently and eats her cake or whatever, and seemingly silently suffers through everybody's conversations, and I feel like they think that she doesn't even know what's going on the entire time.
Yeah, that's heavily implied, if not outright stated, a couple
Until
of times.
yeah, and I think that's supposed to be how the reader looks at it, until you jump into her headspace, and then you realize that she just has like basically contempt for every one of these people.
Yes.
And that she just doesn't understand how they came from her, like.
I do as well. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
You're right.
That's kind of the way it goes a lot of times, I think, and especially in stories like this. I've read a couple stories of similar bent where like you have either like the matriarch or the patriarch of the family who's just sitting silently the entire time, and then you kind of get to know what they are actually thinking, and it's just like contempt. And the reason that they're being silent is because they're trying not to voice their contempt for everybody until it just explodes and they have to say something. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. I think it's really well done. I think that Lispector, sorry that I butchered the name, Veronica.
It's
I'll
just
let it go
Clarice
this one
from
time.
I know that she, is attempting to do that, to lull you into this sense that, the grandmother of this family is kind of like, not necessarily dull, but maybe like senile or like has lost her senses, and like,
They
and
certainly
then-
want to think that
Yeah.
about it.
and then exactly. Well, and then you realize that is not the case.
Sure.
And so let me ask you guys, let me make this an open question. Where do you think that the conclusion starts?
May I make my case? I think, first of all, the story's paced very well because it's basically a day in the life of this birthday party, right?
Mhm.
So as the cake is served and lunch is served and they have drinks, etc. And like then it starts getting dark and people start like awkwardly leaving, which we'll get to. I think when most of the family leaves and it's just her, it's just the grandmother / birthday girl and her daughter.
Right.
I think right around there I think is a good place for the conclusion. When the party starts to wind down and everybody's leaving, like the scene when they're in the driveway, like awkwardly saying goodbye.
Yeah.
I think closes Act 2, and then Act 3 is very brief, yes, but I think when action shifts back to the grandmother in the house, that's where I would draw it.
I would say after the grandmother loses her shit is the end of so slightly before where you cut it off.
All right, yeah, because it's a big dramatic moment, kind of, and a kind of reveal.
Because
I'll agree with
everything
that.
after that wraps up everyone's storyline.
Yeah.
All right, I think you convinced me on that. Sure.
So
I'll go with that.
I also agree. There's a point where after she loses her shit, and then the author starts saying that the party is over. And so I think that kind of like signifies.
It might as well, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right about that, Katie.
Also,
sure.
Maybe a metaphorical thing to say about the story, but also literal, and that now it's the conclusion. We're kind of finishing here.
I like that. I think it's a good case for that point.
Yeah.
What do you
I'll
think?
go ahead and agree with that, because after that, it's kind of everyone awkwardly leaving as
Getting
quickly
out.
as
Which is
they
one of my
possibly
favorite
can.
scenes, by the way. But
I got
sure.
Yes.
to go, basically.
I gots to go.
I got to go.
All
See
their
you next
faces
time.
and the awkward situation of, do we look at her? Do we not? Do we sit
Yes.
here looking at her hands
And
folded
The
in our
terrible,
laps?
the
She's
terrible,
clutching the
terrible joke of
tablecloth,
like, see you next year,
Yeah.
like 6 times. You know, like everybody has that. Like every party has that. Like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna keep saying this joke until it's funny.
And the
to somebody.
sister-in-law going to give her a kiss, and
Yeah.
it felt like sandpaper. I forget what she
Yep.
said.
Which I'll go more into detail. But yes, I have to say that's a really good place to kind of stop
Cut
the
it off,
body
sure.
of it and then go into the conclusion, just because at that point you're even retreating going, this is really awkward. I'm
Yeah,
not sure
sure.
if our audience
I
knows
want to
it.
leave.
Yeah.
You really want to turn and go away
Well, it's a good
at
effect.
this
She
point.
builds up a great effect.
Exactly.
For that.
I
I agree.
can't wait to turn to the old woman. I enjoyed every part of
I'm
it.
doing it now. But sure, so given all that, drawing a line there.
Well, yeah, drawing a line there. I'm going to give it a 1. I think that it was interesting and kept my attention the entire time.
I agree. Pretty much, it's like I said, it's perfectly paced, and it builds up again because of the nature of the setup of the plot.
Mhm.
Like it's getting increased. Like the children are getting more rambunctious,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
adults are hating them more. Like I like that part, of course. But it all makes perfect sense, and it all is built up and paced out, like I said, very well. So I'm giving it a 1.
It's a very good. Before we go any further, I guess it's a very good depiction of how
Yes.
family parties actually
Sure.
work.
Yeah.
You know, like just the stages of them and like
Yep, I
all
agree-
the things
I
that
agree with
happen. So, sorry.
Well, I don't think the strength of the story is necessarily its narrative. I think it's more in stylistically and thematically that it goes as it proceeds, because there's this. It's fantastic. I'm going to give the body a 1 simply from its use of style, which I'll go into later on.
I agree with that to that point, and we'll
with
speak about
its
it. But
subversion, or not subversion necessarily, but how it builds off of what the expectations is already established for certain characters,
yes,
and then adds little details that build upon all these characters. It's absolutely like perfectly structured, and I have to give it full credit for that.
yep, like I said, structure pacing for sure.
Also, definitely agree with those points, but I think what really got me the most with this story is how relatable it was. I mean, it's a different demographic than my family, but I know Irish families are very similar in terms
Sure.
of unspoken family secrets and rivalries that don't really need to be spoken about and never are.
Yeah.
And there's always that tension between family members that
Oh, it's there. I think
There.
like the what is it? The daughter-in-laws. There's 2 of them that are, throughout the story, the body of the story, they are pretty much glaring at each other or
Sure.
avoiding each other's stare, and the children are just uncomfortable with their clothing and want to run around.
Yeah, like
The
Arguing
men
on
keep
screen.
saying, let's not talk business about the birthday girl. And somehow the fact that it keeps coming up, I feel like it's just to get attention. Whoever gets
so
a chance
it's
to
all
shoot it
fake,
out.
kind of.
That goes to the point I was trying to make earlier, that you have the business aspect of it. So you establish that one partner is a son, and the story makes you think that the other partner is just his coworker that's along the
Mhm.
ride with him, until you find out that it's another son there, and that it keeps playing upon your expectations of what has been established already. Yeah, I don't know. It's
It evolves
masterful.
its own dynamic. I think you're right. Like we'll speak about it shortly, but the style, I think, is one of the strongest points. But because it's contained, of course, in the whole story, it could have interweaved itself through.
Absolutely.
I agree.
So, you know you're giving it a 1.
Also would give it a 1.
Me too.
One's
All
all
right.
around on
One
the
for
bottom.
me.
All right, so now it's on to me for conclusion. So, as we just said, we'll draw the line where we agreed upon, which I think, yeah, you're right. You convinced me that that outburst sets the tone and to lead into the end. And of course, I'm always a sucker for, Steve always said this in various podcasts as well, but opening and closing sentence. And I think closing sentence was one of the best I've read in recent memory. It's a sentence I love to see in any story. It made perfect sense for this one. And it's like an exclamation point upon the sort of the down ramp that they took you on, the downer-ish Empire Strikes Back kind of ending that I was going for. But it was perfect. It made perfect sense. Everything built up to it. Like you said, changing your expectations, but somehow you sort of did expect that, but it was presented to you in such a well done way that I very much appreciated, and I think it was a great send off.
Closing sentence was
Death was her mystery. Yeah, I have it written down.
Great closing sentence, actually. I
agree.
really
it got me. So
yeah,
that's always going to sort of, I'll have a bias towards it, but since this one was very well done, I'll give it a 1.
Again, if you're bringing it to the tying it with style and themes, it really hammers home all the themes that it attempts to establish throughout this.
Mm-hmm.
It is a magnificent, it's the perfect ending to a fantastic story.
Exactly.
So I have nothing more to add to that, really, beyond that.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to say either, but
aside from giving it a 1.
Aside from saying that it was well done, everything came to a head exactly as it should have, and again, it was this is how family parties end, and this is kind of what happens, and you're kind of left thinking, okay, well, this is another small chapter in my life closed, and what's next? And death is the only mystery left to be had. This is the same as it's always been. What's left? What mysteries are left?
I'm going to bring that up at your next birthday party.
I can't wait.
I'm going to give it a 1, and I'm just going to go ahead and say that while, yes, death was her mystery is a great send-off, the second to last sentence was the one that I chuckled. I stopped before I even finished the story, where it says,
read it out.
"What if there's no dinner tonight?" she mused.
Yeah.
And my friends know I love food, so I actually stopped there and I'm like, why, that would actually be a really good thought. That would probably be what I would be focusing on. Am I going to have a meal after this?
And that's kind of the thing that she's been thinking about the whole time. She's like, well, we had cake, but we haven't
it was
really
referenced
had another
earlier.
meal.
It's a callback to something that
give me a glass of wine, and where is my next meal coming from?
Sure.
The important thing to her was that she hadn't eaten yet,
Yes. Meanwhile,
it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing. And
No
again,
one had given her any food throughout the
no,
party.
not
She
at
had
all.
some cake.
No, they had her sat and going back to the body
She
real
did
quick.
eat cake.
Yes, but listen, they had her sitting at the head of the tables before lunch in order to have everything prepped. They had her set up as
it was a callback, like I said. Yeah.
part of the decorations as opposed to the person we're celebrating today.
Yes,
Which I think
exactly.
it's, while trying to provide that respect to the hierarchy of the family at this point, they were kind of just, again, with the suits and the ties and the dressing, she was just one more thing to set up.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that
she was a set piece at her own birthday.
all of that revolving to the very last, second to last sentence of, well, where's dinner? What if there's no dinner?
I agree. It's sort of hauntingly ironic, and that's something that I like. It's perfect.
I'll give it a 1.
Yes.
Definitely a 1.
I'm going to give it a 1 as well.
Visual imagery was great.
One's
Left an
everywhere.
impression.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Cool.
All right, I'm on to themes.
Indeed, you are.
So I think there's quite a bit here.
Yes.
I appreciate it because I love themes. So I'm going to hit on one aspect and I'm going to open it up to everybody else. Okay. So I loved the dynamic that they built with this family. And from the fact that, while the majority of the tale was told through the old woman's point of view, and you got to see her kind of how disappointed she was with everyone, that men aren't what they used to be, and look at all these hussies that they're marrying, and she only has one grandson that she cares about now. you also get to occasionally see flashes of the other family members and how, like, Jose was one of her sons, who felt constantly like he didn't live up to his older brother who had passed away's legacy, and now it was his role to play the alpha male in the family, and always fretting over that and telling the terrible joke over and over again. And you find out at the very, like, the last paragraph or two that he's incredibly obese as well, which, again, they let these little details out throughout the story that change characters. And it's interesting not only to see how, like, well, I forget which daughter-in-law it was, or if it was a daughter, so many family members here, that is saying, like, that she has this secret. You never find out, I believe, what that secret is.
Yeah.
But she keeps
I think it's
bringing
heavily
it up.
implied, but I mean, like, it's there, sure.
But the idea that, like, everyone is hiding something or has these baggage that they carry with them with this family, and that nobody really wants to be there. The old woman doesn't want to be at her birthday. None of the family members. I think that whole dynamic that they build up is fantastic. So that's my theme I'm going to go with. I'm going to let everyone else discuss whatever else they want.
Yeah, you just fucking stole mine, but I mean, like, it seems so obvious. Like, but it's and well addressed. But sure, there's, like, perhaps I want to say something like there are many sub-themes within that, various facets of that you can get into. Like, maybe this ties into my famous antagonist point that I always make, but it's the disappointment with your family and yourself sometimes, and the relationships between all of that, as explored by, viewpoints of those who are there just out of duty. Again, like you said, whoever made that point earlier, like, just rote duty. We have to do this, but let's try to have a good time. But again, the fakeness of it all. I think I saw that a lot in it.
See, I could totally see myself, like, 70 years from now or whatever, looking at all my spawn, how that came, like, how did I ever produce any of these people?
It made me think of this really random reference. It made me think of a thing from Kingdom Come where the grandmother basically thought, rephrased, how has it come to this? as she looks around at her family and surveys them, and like you said, like, is disappointed in them all, is somewhat disdainful, but perhaps, I mean, here's I think some of the genius of the story, and perhaps the style also speaks to this. Maybe she has a valid point, or maybe she's just wildly misjudging them. Maybe they're buffoons, maybe they're not. And probably it's, of course, a gray area somewhere in between.
Right.
But it's all presented so well that you could get aspects of all of that.
But I think the key point here is that you're not only seeing her perspective.
Yeah, that's what
you're
I'm
seeing
saying.
everybody else's, so that you get a hint of that.
That's what I mean.
Like, the grandmother, there is a lot of gray area here to who these people are.
Yeah, so all of that, like, that, and whoever else wants to make the next point about themes, I think will be just as strong as the ones we just talked about.
I think you covered them pretty well. I mean, it's this overarching theme of, like, disappointment in the family, and, like, but here's the thing: even when you're seeing the other characters, I feel like you're kind of seeing them in a negative light, and this is kind of through the grandmother's eyes, even though you don't hear her
it's not
thoughts
necessarily
about
written
them
as such. Sure, I get
at the
it.
time. I don't think there's anything that's really through the other character's eyes throughout. And that's effective to me. I think it's fine. I don't need to see this story through everybody else's eyes necessarily. I think that it's those characters, how they act, but it's like I never felt any sense that I liked these characters. And if you were seeing the world through their eyes, you clearly would like them, like they would be much more sympathetic towards themselves.
I don't think you're ever seeing anyone have self-reflection in the story.
Right.
They're always judging others.
Well, no, you're seeing the grandmother have self-reflection over her entire life.
Over judging
and, like,
her entire
she's
family.
judging her own life
Sure.
based on all of these characters that are in the story.
But that's like an omniscient, like, sort of point of view from the author, but she's just carefully omitting the other characters' information, because she does give a lot of description on the inner workings between the daughters-in-laws and the sons and the daughters, and
right. But I think those are all things that the grandmother probably knows.
Maybe, but I think it's kept gray enough.
So it could theoretically be from her eyes, and
Maybe.
it's not necessarily
I like
looking at it from her eyes, but it's looking at it from her perspective. I think more so than anything else.
No, I like the way you described it. Like, it's omniscient narrator, but omitting some details, so it's not quite that degree sometimes.
yeah.
I'm going to agree with you on this point, Steve-O, that I feel that every other character, when you do see their point of view, is influenced by the grandmother's point of view throughout. because she has had although maybe she feels that she's powerless now, her opinion has crafted all of the other characters.
Yeah.
And I also
That's
wanted
fair.
to bring a point about, in a sense, the kind of feminism in this story, where the grandmother, it's interesting to me because I guess it's the old school point of view here, but you also see it in some of the younger women too, that like it's defined by, in a sense, the males in their lives. The grandmother is saying that she bared children with the grandfather. She has nothing but her family in this to define herself by.
No,
Right.
I will disagree. I think what she was describing is that she did as she was told, which was she lived a safe and appropriate life as, a lady. She married at the appropriate time. She had the children. He was respectful as a companion because, and I quote, he respected the proper, I guess, recovery time after she, and that's not a direct quote, after she bore the children and everything. So I will say, yes, in a feminist way, she's saying that she lived this life, according to what she was supposed to, but it didn't turn out that way. So it's a judgment to, I guess, society as a whole, is why is this turning out the way it did, even though I was following those rules?
Let me rephrase that then. I don't think that was the point, intent of the author to say that this was the appropriate. I think she was making a critical statement.
Yes,
about
absolutely.
that
Yeah.
in society.
And I think that the grandmother hates, she did all that and then she kind of hates herself for it.
Or resents it in some way. Sure.
Yeah, or resents being forced to do that.
And you see, and all the female characters you see in this resent, aside from perhaps the children, resent the roles. You see Zilda, which is one of the daughters who has to take care of her,
She's like the main-
resent that role of being the motherly caregiver. Like,
Yeah.
why isn't everyone else helping me here?
Sure.
You see the males resent the traditional kind of roles of or want to escape to their kind of traditional roles.
Yeah.
You see the daughter-in-laws who are kind of every female here seems miserable by playing by the rules of society.
But at the same time, they don't want to be, I guess, singled out, because even the lady of the house, Zilda, who you're referring to, she at one point is looking to not be the person to blame for the birthday girl spitting, for
Sure,
acting
yeah.
as a child, being, out of line. And so she looks and then she steps back and wants to be included with the rest of the family as they judge, because while, yes, it's not obvious the way the family is, and any judgments that the grandmother is, well, the grandmother is very obvious in her opinion of the family, but they themselves seem to also take that opinion and give it back to the grandmother of, we're here again. It comes back to the same point. We are here as an obligation. In fact, I came to avoid not coming is essentially
it's an
what
early
was
line.
one
Yeah,
of the
I remember
lines
that.
that
Yeah.
started off the story, and that is everyone, I think, in the family at this point.
And also, you just actually remind me of another theme that you can take out of this. It's interesting how they kind of show both the use of children and the people having to take care of them, and then when you get old, you have to be taken care of like a child. I thought, although that was probably a tertiary theme.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's
I
like
thought
a
handled
sub
Right,
theme,
right.
but I get it. Sure,
I think that was a conscious effort. To
it's an
make that
element
message
contained
there.
therein. Sure,
Right now, I think the baby boomer generation is getting older, and that population is larger than ever has been before. And I think that issue is coming up so much in the past couple decades.
it's being more prevalent. Sure,
Yeah, so I think that that was going to be the only thing I was going to mention, is the relationship between our generation and how we're caring for and respecting the generation now, and the kind of,
transition between
dependent
them.
relationship that they rely on each other.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, not being a female, so I can't speak to feminism per se in the story, but of course I'm going to bring it back and I'll address this in the next topic. But it's just the general resentment that you may feel in the culture that which you were raised in, and or again, have some kind of obligation to your family and wherever it may be, even if you don't necessarily have all that close of a connection to them, and you're just, like you said, I came to avoid not coming. Like, that's such a great line.
It is.
It sets says so much that that unfolds afterwards. But it's as if we're touching on like themes we haven't quite addressed fully, I think that's another one that is a very broad thing, but still is prevalent in a lot of people's culture and feelings towards their family.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give it a 1 either way. On all the themes we said.
A lot of deep themes and a lot of
1.
deep dives on that type of stuff. I'm going to give it a 1 as well.
0.
What?
A 1.
I'm pretty sure you've given it a 1.
That's a solid
It's a
1 for me.
facetious
1.
zero.
All right. One's all
one,
around.
one, one.
Perfect score so far. Might be changing soon.
Hmm.
Katie? Antagonist?
Antagonist. I think it was a pretty broad. Overall, I think the story is pretty negative. So I think it's hard
In a good
to pinpoint one or the other. Probably she had harbored the most resentment towards her sister or sister-in-laws. Is that daughter-in-laws? I'm sorry.
Daughter-in-law?
Yeah.
That would probably be my vote. They were pretty effective too, the way she described them. The background story that they did offer about the sister-in-laws, how, her son didn't even want to be there, so she was kind of a proxy for
Right.
his presence in the family, and how little she thought of it. I mean, with the explosion in the body of the story, I mean, it kind of seems like everyone is a protagonist.
Exactly.
Like
That's exactly the
everyone.
right answer,
That's
I would
kind of what
say.
it seems like to me, too. Well, I don't...
That's kind of the point of
I'm
the
kinda
story,
struggling
Yeah.
over
as
this
we
one.
said earlier. But
I may give this a 0 just because I don't think...
nah, your bullshit 0 scale.
It wasn't-
I know what you're going to say. Go ahead, though.
I mean, yes, everyone is an No. This is. I think I might be off of what you think I'm going to say.
Okay.
But, I do think that everyone is supposed to be an antagonist in this, but I don't trust anyone as an antagonist in this story. I think it's too close to the grandmother.
There wasn't enough
To-
detail offered either.
It's too close to the grandmother to make all of the family members
All right.
antagonists.
That's...
Which I don't trust
You're
them as antagonists in this.
You don't
I don't think
trust
that
them?
they're all
I don't think any of them really had any
I don't
kind
think
of.
I don't think that all of them should be viewed as being antagonizing towards the main character, who's the
Yes.
grandmother. And
Yes.
despite the fact that she may look at it like that from time to time, I also don't trust her outburst and her anger as being the way that she actually feels about her family on a long-term scale.
All right. Let me get this out of the way because I tried to bust your balls, and maybe you can do this as you normally do when I answer this question.
Oh, is it society?
Yes, of course, on a very small scale. The society of your family, obviously.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, in this case, I'm mostly agreeing with you in the sense that it's almost like a revolving door. Anyone could be it
Right.
at any specific time because of the nature of the dynamic of the relationships and of the setup.
I somewhat agree and somewhat disagree, so I'm going to go to this.
Cut up the difference.
Everyone, if you consider everyone the protagonist of their own lives, there's someone at that party who's the antagonist to someone.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that's necessarily effective for describing an actual antagonist. Nor do
Sure,
I feel
exactly.
that the grandmother, anyone there has any antagonistic feelings towards the grandmother. Yeah,
Right.
They might not like her. Yeah, they might be only doing it off of duty. But I feel that she is more so an antagonist to
To all of
Although
them.
it all
If
depends,
you
like I said.
For instance, if you saw it from Jose's point of view,
Yeah, exactly.
like she would be a major antagonist in his life because she would be like every time you see it from his point of view, he's worried about what she thinks of him.
Mm-hmm.
So, granted, I don't think that gives a strong antagonist for anyone for the grandmother. It was the protagonist of this.
That's kind of how I feel.
Yeah.
Katie, do you want to go first? Okay. So I'm caught between just kind of going into this or waiting until we go into style. Because I do think that it's the entire family. And
all right, if that's the case, my question is: anyone who thinks that same thing, which I do too, if that's the case, shouldn't they get a 1?
do I think that the family as a
Collectively,
whole, as the
yes.
antagonist, get a 1?
Yes.
I think yes.
Okay, then.
And
Good.
I
1 vote for me as well.
again,
One person on my side.
And I'm just, again, I'm battling between explaining why I think
But I
this
see what you
and
mean,
also
yeah.
crossing over to style, because
Sure.
I don't know if anyone wants me to go into this now or save the
I'll save
goodies
it
for
for
later. All right,
Well,
so
wait, but I
Well,
I
just
think
stick to
I know what you mean.
antagonist as purely as you can, I guess.
okay, so I think that the family as a whole really is the antagonist, and here's my reasoning without going too far into style. I think that the family, in some way, shape, or form, every character shows their frustration at having to do this for her, and so while it's not at her, it's still this chore
in relation to her.
to
I guess
her.
I want to
Correct.
say. Yeah.
And so with that, I will give it a 1.
Well, then I can make the argument that birthdays are the antagonist because
Trust me, I
Welcome
was
to my
almost going
world.
to do that. Like, don't get me wrong. You guys know me. I was almost going to do that.
But like,
But
I
family
don't think
events.
that's I think it's too vague because I don't think there's any like the conflict here isn't necessarily the family. The conflict is them having to be together.
Yeah,
For
that's what I'm saying.
for the as you were saying, Scott. So I don't know. I don't think it's strong enough to consider. It doesn't seem like there's any conflict here that is directed. That is.
Fine.
I'm going to disagree.
Let me make one final. I also disagree, and let me present my case, and you present yours. Mine is that if that's true, then that's the whole point of the story. Then, so you have to give them a 1 because of that.
I don't know if I agree with that either. I think, the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. And that is rampant throughout the story. And,
Okay, I like that too.
If she wanted to have a clear definition of what the protagonists are, then she needed to write it in a different way. So I think that because she didn't follow her
I like that
writing
argument.
style with what she intended, that it should get a 0.
I agree that it should get a 0. As per my previous
I'm less
arguments,
convinced.
I think this family
No, I mean you might have made me
is
switch.
not actually an antagonist, and I don't think this story needs an antagonist, honestly. Or at
No,
least,
it's powerful
I don't think
without
it is a very
it.
effective one. I think that the family is supposed to be the antagonist, but I don't think that it's supposed to be a strong antagonist to the grandma. I think that you're supposed to. I think that you're supposed to kind of agree with all sides of this, despite the fact that the grandmother is clearly the protagonist in the story.
And I feel that a strong antagonist would have been a detriment to this story.
Right.
But I don't know if that, by our scale, something that should get a 1 or a 0.
I think that a
get
strong
it.
antagonist would have made this like a very stereotypical
Yes.
broken family, and I don't think that's what it's supposed to be. I think this is supposed to be a tight knit family
I
that
think you guys are right about
has
that.
the
now.
standard, has the standard bullshit that a family goes through. You go to these parties. Sometimes you don't like them. Sometimes you do. You go there out of a sense of duty for your family, and that's kind of what takes over for a while. And sometimes you have great times at the parties, and sometimes it's a boring ass party for your
Sure.
100-year-old grandmother.
Sometimes grandma starts screaming at you.
Sometimes
Right,
grandma
exactly.
gets mouthy, but sure, so not even.
And she spits on the floor and everybody goes home.
Yeah.
You guys just both made a good point. I guess it ties into the next question and goes back to what you opened with, E, that they could, by the other side of the coin, they could all be protagonists then, in a sense. They could be
Right.
both. They share almost both roles. But you're right. I agree that there's no, I guess one character, of course, that is the protagonist in capitals, if you will. But maybe it ties into my theme, answer where if it's just the resentment that you harbor towards those who are members of your family, who each of them sort of personifies something you resent in some way, variously, then that's effective. You know what I mean?
Right, but even if that's the case, I don't think that resentment is anything that's seems
There's no one that stands above the other.
seated or anything. I don't think that anybody really
Like someone had a personal
thinks
vendetta.
about this a week later and is like, man, I really hate grandma, or anything like
That's
that.
funny, but-
I don't
No,
think
I
that.
get it.
I think
do.
that it's just
But
standard
it's a
family
passive. It's a passive.
Yeah, that's what I'm
anger.
saying. That
It's
might-
boiling underneath
That may be why it's
the
effective.
surface, and I think that's why I'm still keeping it a 1. It's all good arguments, and I can see your points. I'm still going to stick to a 1
Yeah.
because it's simmering. It's right
Okay,
below
I
the
got it, yeah.
surface.
That's. I see. I see both sides of the argument perfectly. You can almost flip a coin about
So
it.
let's give
But-
scores.
Yeah,
then.
because
Yeah.
I want to give the story credit, I'm going to give it a 1 at the end of the day because it was effective, even if they don't necessarily qualify, again, in quotes.
It is, of course, that bubbling under the surface thing,
Yeah.
but I think it's mundane. I think it's an everyday.
But
type of
mundanity
thing.
is the
I
most
don't-
horrifying
But
I
it
don't-
thing.
I don't
plays
see
its
that-
role in the story. That's the thing. It plays the role that it needs
That's
to
what I'm-
as the
Right, it
antagonist
does, but I don't
in
think
the
it's.
story.
I don't think it's a antagonist in a strict sense. I don't see it as being important to the overall
Alright.
story. I think there are a lot of other things about this story that are important, and I don't think
Alright.
antagonist is one of them. So I'm going to give it a 0.
Mm.
You actually flipped me on this, Steve-O.
Heyo.
Even though you were arguing
For
for,
once.
a 0, you switched me to a 1.
I gave you a 1. The mundanity of life is.
All right, so you're giving it a 1 each?
Yeah, I'm going to put my final thesis here.
Okay.
That the mundanity was important because, as I said, a strong antagonist would have been negative to this storyline. And from the fact that it works very well, and that it didn't fail. Like, I would give a 0 to an antagonist that could have been better or failed the story.
Right.
That's a
And
good
it did
rephrase of
neither of those.
what I concluded eventually, yes.
Okay.
All right?
Scott, you're giving it a 1.
Yes.
And Katie, you're sticking with your 0?
I stick to my original statement.
All right.
Which was
A 0.
Okay.
Yes.
Veronica, protagonist.
It's the birthday girl. And
Could
I
be.
think that she was very successful. The way that she was written in the story was very to the point. There was, as she's being introduced, she's almost, like I said, a decoration in the celebration. But once you finally
It's an amazing phrase. Go on.
once you get into her head, it's the things that she says, just, she's so upset and just, she wants better, and she still sees maybe 1 or 2 individuals in the family that, or one specifically, one grandchild, where she still has hopes for. But everyone else, it just seems,
cause.
yes, has let her down in one way, shape, or form. And for some reason, communism comes into play at some point. But, you know, that's neither
briefly
here nor
referenced,
there.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think she did a great job because she's doing all this in a very stoic way. She does have an outburst. Yes, she finally loses it. But throughout the entire thing, she's just observing, and in her silence, being 89 years old, of course, she is a strong character, and within her mind, just the thoughts that are coming out, whether it's, you know, in a very negative view of her family, I think it's very well expressed. I think she really kind of brought as a whole, the whole family, the idea of this get together, because she's not helping things either. I mean, I'll give you guys that, but she's a great protagonist. And moving on.
I'm sorry, the idle uniformed nanny with her mouth hanging open is definitely the protagonist. No, but
I actually highlighted that.
Yes.
There was a few questionable things in the beginning. I'm like, okay.
But
But
no, absolutely.
yeah, the whole story revolves around her, and it sells. That's all.
Mm-hmm. I think that she's a great character. Kind of an asshole at points.
No,
For
she's
sure.
a wonderful woman.
Have you
But-
ever
yeah.
known a grandmother or grandfather of that age not to be?
Well, at times.
They've earned it.
89.
At times, for sure.
At that point.
I love my grandparents. I loved all of my grandparents.
My
but,
grandmother was incredibly sweet and kind until you got her to private.
yeah.
And then she became a monster.
That's just everyone, of course. Go on.
I mean, it's kind of these. I feel it now. Like all these thoughts that have been bubbling up that I'm just keeping suppressed for my entire life, that I don't want to say anything. And in another 50 years, who the hell knows what I'm going to say at one point during a family party when I have a bunch of people around and I just hate them all, you know? Like I'm just hating everyone.
I'm sure family
My-
awaits that day.
And my entire life, you know. But like, I think that's what makes her effective, is
Sure.
that she's realistic. You know, that she's giving a voice to all these things that, like, especially for, you know, a lot of women who went through stuff, the same type of stuff that she went through, where like you're just kind of keeping everything bottled up, like all your hopes and dreams bottled up, and like just doing what people, I mean, not just women, men too, like anybody, you know,
Yes, humans.
keeping
We've
all your
agreed.
hopes and dreams bottled up to do what you're supposed to do. And then at some point, you know, you kind of look around you and say, holy, how did I get here?
Wait, let me ask a question. Do what you're supposed to do, or do what's expected of you? Because
Same
I
thing.
feel like a lot of people of that generation think that the honorable thing would be to do what's expected of you.
So, that's what I mean. It's the same thing
Supposed in quotes,
That's-
I've been. That's what you meant, right?
in those terms. Yes, not supposed to do like by your own standards, but by society's standards, I guess. And I think that's what makes her a great protagonist. And you know, she's finally allows herself to, you know, talk. I mean, granted, she may do this every birthday party. I don't know. Maybe she just yells at all of her family every birthday party, spits on the ground, and like everybody leaves. Like, see you next year,
That
Grandma.
doesn't make any sense because I'd be back at that birthday party constantly.
Exactly. But I think that she's really effective as a protagonist.
Well, I mostly agree, and I'm going to sort of almost use your argument that you sometimes use against me, that because you see the most portions of the story from her point of view, she like has to be the protagonist. If not her, then who?
Right.
And like, you know, I don't want to fall back into the rabbit hole of the argument we just had. Everyone maybe, but no, certainly you get the most, again, insights from her perspective throughout, at least later on and going into the end. So I think all I'm saying, she qualifies as the protagonist, and yeah, she was great.
May I make a point for her being the protagonist by just the use of descriptions in here? From the fact that most of the characters in here who don't have names are done from the grandmother's kind of descriptions of them. Which I imagine if I had this family this large and I didn't care about them. Sure. The you're married to my son who is
and you're from wherever. Whatever city you're from. Oh yeah,
you're the kid who studies English in the school. So I feel that's a very awesome old person thing to do. Sure. So I have to give her credit completely.
All right.
There you go.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's usually how I remember, like, using not analogies, but trying to remember someone through someone else.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Mnemonics, like, kind of, almost.
Yeah.
Hey, you're Joey's friend.
Hey, you're Joey's
Joey's bada thing.
You're the kid who eats all the cake all the time.
Yeah, sure. But, yeah, I'm going to give it a 1.
All right. 1 from Steve-O.
1 here.
1.
Alrighty.
The two of you, Scott and Katie?
Yeah. 1.
I said 1.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Listening to the dude's score?
I'm keeping score at home.
All right. Let's go on.
All right. I'm going to do
Here's
supporting characters.
Yeah.
I wrote down a bunch of names. Zilda, who was, the daughter. Jose.
She was the hostess, if you will.
Right, the hostess. The Jose and his business partner, Manuel, who
brother.
Was, hold on, who was Jose's brother?
Yes.
And the birthday girl's daughter. Or son.
Manuel?
Yeah.
Probably the youngest brother.
Why was he described as a business partner? Maybe I missed this.
Yeah, because they're brothers in business.
Line,
yeah.
No. They say it like 2 or 3 times. His business partner.
No, they say business partner constantly, but there's one line at the end where he turned to his brother.
Like an afterthought.
Yeah.
That's really strange.
His brother, who was also his partner. Like, it's dropped in there for sure.
For some reason, I thought he was just some guy that was there. Like,
you were wrong.
Jose's friend. I honestly, I thought that it was like from the grandmother's. So maybe we're getting way off the rails, but like from the grandmother's point of view, it was his quote unquote business partner. I thought he was gay, and like this is his.
No, it's wrong. They're like not shady brothers, but like he's a very poor business partner. But because he's his brother, that's why they went into business.
Fair enough.
And it's look, just think about it this way.
That makes sense.
It's perfect sense for the whole dynamic. So that's all.
I guess I missed that line.
But I think because of that, where you don't really know and it's so easily missed, and the fact that pretty much everyone is a antagonist in the situation, like
right.
there are no supporting characters.
Well,
and that's
they
why
all are.
just like
that's the weird thing about this
like
story.
that portion of it could go either way, and that's why I think it doesn't.
It's hard where you don't.
If you want to break it up, if you take it as a whole, but when you break it down,
that's kind of what I was going to say. Like you have all these characters who
have multiple roles.
They're like all of them exactly.
They are kind of supporting, but yeah, I think that the entire family acts as an antagonist, which I mentioned earlier. So I don't know where. Like I was thinking about maybe making like the family like one thing. Like the family is the antagonist, and then each of these characters individually are supporting. But that's
the maid is a supporting character
with the mouth open.
I get what you mean, but I don't think it holds up.
I don't know. Maybe I have to.
Also,
see what you guys think.
The neighbor who had shown up.
Oh yeah, the neighbor.
Oh, the neighbor.
Yes.
Anyone
poor supporting character. I'm giving supporting a 0 based on the neighbor who had shown up.
And I'm going to say yes. As a whole, you could probably argue that they're the supporting characters, but I'm going to say that Cordelia is. Now, if you guys remember, she was one of the daughter-in-laws. Mm-hmm. But throughout the entire story, you're watching her, I guess, experience or kind of also taking the same role that the birthday girl did, which was kind of observing, looking around her. And towards the end of the story, she's sitting there going, oh shit, this is going to be me in 50, 60 years from now. Yeah. And she's frightened because I guess at that point, that's her secret that Ian was mentioning earlier. Everyone has a secret in the story. Her specifically, it's her fear, it seems like, from becoming what Grandma is
into her
now.
Future and
yes.
horrified by it.
And she's frustrated at the inability of having a, organized birthday for the grandmother. And she's sitting back and watching in stunned silence and fear of, oh my God, grandmother just spit on the ground. And she just had an outburst. And then, oh my God, she's staring out into the, distance, kind of dazed. And everyone in the family is even now starting to kind of single her out, going, what's wrong with her? And it's the same thing that they've been doing with grandmother. Grandmother, why are you doing that? And they're looking at her like she's going back and reverting back as a child, even though she's the oldest person and the most respected one, supposedly, in the story.
Well, Cordelia is also the mother of
the grandson.
The grandson
yes.
that the old woman likes.
Yes.
You have that tie in there as well.
Yeah, sure.
Just throwing it in there, I would say that she, if anything, would be the one that was mentioned enough as far as giving the same description, the way that Lispector, the author, described kind of the thoughts in the grandmother's mind. She also, even though briefly and in, dispersed throughout the story, was giving Cordelia's opinions or observations rather.
So Cordelia's the protagonist?
I would think that she is the supporting character. She is the main supporting character. While you can argue for the whole family, I think the whole family is, remember, the antagonist, and I think that Cordelia is a supporting character.
No, I think, again, you can get both out of it. You can sort of pick her out as one that is elevated, I suppose, but they all, again, can serve the supporting role depending on how, again, they're dynamic. So all I'm saying, either way you cut it up, I think it's effective.
Yes.
Whether or not you pick out specific ones, and if you do, then I think that's still perfectly fine and perfectly valid.
Sure.
Yeah, I like that argument, actually. I think that convinced me to give supporting characters a 1 in this.
Well, I am as well.
I'm giving it a 0.
Okay.
All right.
For real?
Yeah.
This time? You're not joking?
No,
I got you.
I don't think any of them were particularly effective. I forgot about Cordelia until you brought it up. Veronica,
honestly,
fine,
I was gonna give it a 0 until Veronica made the Cordelia argument, so I'm gonna give that a 1.
But if she wasn't memorable at all to me,
sure,
yeah,
that's true.
Something.
And again, valid point. And, going back to what I said originally, you can make the argument that none of them were good supporting characters. You can make the argument that all of them were, as a whole, an okay supporting character in the story, but her specifically, in reading, again, I've read this story a couple times, but she is what I would say would be the supporting character.
I absolutely agree with your assessment. I just forgot about it, and that doesn't
absolutely
doesn't bode well.
Yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah, took off points for it. Sure. So I believe it is on to me now for dialogue, which is one that I often somewhat find difficult to answer because I usually don't like. It's hard for dialogue to get me or that I think is well done. But again, as we said many times, to a number of other questions, that it's so well formed. The scene is set so well for you that normally reading a story of this nature, I probably would still dislike the dialogue. But this probably goes into style, as we've been waiting to all speak about. It's done so realistically, I think, even in a situation in which I would hate the dialogue. And again, it goes back to the sort of fakeness of some of it. Like, people are playing roles and they're
scripted.
Yeah, exactly. So it's effective where it normally might not have been for me. So I guess that's pretty big credit coming from me. I'm
taking a turn on our old thing about supporting cast, because this has a line that I want to scream out the next time I want some wine. The devil take you, you pack of sissies, cuckolds, and whores. Give me a glass of wine.
Hear, hear.
All right.
That stuck out to me, and it's just
you like that line well enough, though.
I thought the entire dialogue was perfectly fine, and not only perfectly fine, but very realistic.
Yeah,
it wasn't just workmanlike, which is a thing that you often criticize for.
You're right.
It felt very real, so I have to give it credit.
Granny darling, won't it make you sick? The short, plump little granddaughter.
That was, I mean,
ventured cautiously.
that was the best. That was the best part of the dialogue. Is that and I've been saying this the entire podcast, but like that, it felt like a party. It felt like a family party, and like all the dialogue made it feel like just a standard family party. You know, that anybody could have been at. Like, you know, you go to a family party, and this is kind of the conversations that you get into, or like the kind of the things that get shouted out over the din. You know.
I agree with all that, and I don't have much more to say.
And for that, a 1.
Yeah.
Just to note, this is my favorite dialogue in the story was, I guess, maybe a couple pages in, when the son, Jose, was trying to give the speech for the grandmother. And he starts off, and it goes terribly wrong, by the way, for anyone listening. Speech, It's the worst speech ever. Also, this guy probably could have, done well with a speech class. But in one of the lines, he goes, "Not everyone has the privilege and the honor to gather around their mother." Jose cleared his throat, recalling that Jonga, which is the other son, had been the one who gave speeches. And then the next line goes, "Their mother, comma." His niece laughed softly, and the slowest cousin laughed without getting it. Now, that's not something that you would normally hear, and it's not a correct structure, really, but it's the way that the dialogue is set up, and also explaining. Exactly. And it's a child that's actually, I guess, seeing or hearing that, where it's this awkward break in the dialogue, and it's meant to do that, and it's delivered so well in that a child is like, "Their mother, comma, exclamation
It evokes
point."
the sense of actually being in
it's
that
a
situation.
breakdown of a terrible speech, and that in and of itself really brought out the awkwardness in that dialogue. It's not something that you catch on, but that after like the third time I've read the story was, what?
Yeah.
Sure. And then I had to go back and then go forward, and it's a beautiful thing as far as dialogue. So I'll give it a 1 for that.
Yeah. I already gave it a 1.
All right.
Scott,
Yep. I think we all gave it a 1, I believe.
And Veronica 1. All right.
And for the reasons we said.
I believe I'm in the style.
Mm-hmm.
I love the style of this story. I think we've delved into quite a bit of it so far.
Yeah.
We've made references to it throughout. I'm a sucker for a great description. And
yes.
The descriptions in here, and I mentioned this earlier, and the way they build upon each other. And that you never get the whole picture. You slowly, it's sprinkled over the course of the entire story, which changes characters as it goes on. I have to get full credit, and we're running long anyway, so I'm going to give it a 1 and throw it to the group.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 1 as well. I think that I've said a lot about why I love this style. Just the idea that it fully encapsulated this idea of family and of family get-togethers and things like that. And I think that it did that really, really well. So I'm going to leave it at that and give style a 1.
I agree. I don't know what to say either. I'll just have to speak for Verno. This is a translation, right?
Yes.
So yeah, again,
from Portuguese.
It always matters. And if this is what it's like to read in his native language, it had a perfect flowing. There was nothing jarring ever about it, nothing cringeworthy. It's everything we just said. It was all very natural and organic, and it just it carried you along very well. And it at times you could see it was so good that you're sucked into the scene because you've been there before, most likely. And you could see this one unfolding before your very eyes.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, the best stories make for the best visual imagery, and I got a lot of that from the story. So, also a 1 from my end.
And I'm growing a boner here about the story, so I'm just gonna...
I don't think you've lost your boner for this story this whole time.
I have since the moment we started this. I've had a boner for this, but I just have to say this because it's absolutely necessary, I think, to really understand the style of the story overall. One of the portions of the story was describing when the grandmother actually cuts the cake, and the way that Lispector describes it is with the first slice cut, as though the first shovelful of dirt has been dug. They all closed in with their plates in hand, elbowing each other in feigned excitement, each going after his own little shovelful.
Yep,
and it's like digging a grave.
Exactly.
That was the imagery there.
Yes, and towards the end of the story, go towards the conclusion, it seems like, oh, well, the only mystery she has is death. Oh, I guess we'll be here for next year 90, birthday, 90th year, etc.,
See you next
etc.
year, eh?
And it was just beautifully written, just across the board. I love her description. It's sometimes so blatantly obvious, and then there's so many layers to it that something well written can really be taken as just what it's worth, and also could mean so many other things. And just that was one of my favorite lines as far as style, and I'll give it a 1, obviously.
All right.
That's everybody on style, right?
Yep.
I believe Katie.
Recommendation, as in, I had a question. Recommendation as an improvement,
Like,
or
no.
Would you recommend?
Would you recommend it to
other
people?
Oh,
and
would I
your
recommend
final
it to
thoughts
people?
on the book or this story?
I mean, overall, great. I mean, it was hard only because I think she tried to introduce a lot of people in the beginning. I got kind of confused. I had to read it over a couple times, so repetitiveness, I think, might have been my only issue, but and sometimes it was necessary, so it was okay. But I would definitely recommend this short story to other people.
Yeah. I absolutely would too. I think that it was very well done, and very few shortcomings. I think that if you like a good literary type short story, I think this is right up your alley.
I also recommend it, but I also think it's one of those kind of stories you can read over and over again and get more out of it.
See more nuances too. I was going to say that same thing. Yeah. No, I agree. I'm definitely recommending it, and for that reason, for everything we just said, it's again something I wouldn't probably have normally read, were it not for doing this episode. Mm-hmm. But I'm very glad to have read it. I like to expand my horizons and to delve into literature that I wouldn't normally again have explored. But when it's well done, I definitely will have to appreciate it, and I would say, yeah, to anyone who asks me, I would say check it out.
Most influential writer or Jewish writer since Kafka. Okay. I think we had you at that.
No, maybe. Like, I didn't know that going into this, so it's not like I had any predilection to it. But
and of course, I already told you I have a boner, so
yes,
indeed, I'll give it.
Indeed, you do.
The metaphorical boner.
Yes, but if not this, then anything by her. Please go.
But specifically this, since we just reviewed it.
Yes.
Sure.
So the final scores were myself, Ian, and Katie gave us a miserly 9. And Scott and Veronica went above and beyond and gave it a perfect score of 10. So of the 5 combined scores, that gives us an aggregate score of a 9.4.
Thank you for joining us. Here's me, Veronica. Thank you.
Thanks for staying with us. This is Katie.
I'm Jonathan, though Veronica should have introduced me.
And I'm Scott Thurlow. Happy birthday to me.
And Steve Ormosi. We're Steve-O, and we're out of here.
Lots to do about nothing. Lots to do about nothing. Music and editing by Chris Morgan.
Lots to do about nothing.
This has been a Lost Signals production. All rights reserved.